No, you're talking about Halata Vagina.
Exactly.
That one.
It's like,
You have to be
Ryan, how
really
could you
careful
forget about
how
that
you
name?
say that.
Of all
Halata
people, you should know.
Vagina.
Exactly. I'm sorry. In this podcast, we love to go back and check out many films because maybe we didn't watch a couple of the sequels, or we always have that lingering question of, does this film still hold up? And when you talk about something like Fargo, which was a drama film, I think that movie really stood the test of time exceptionally well because the way the characters were written and everything was so well done. But then comedy films are a product of its time because they really tie into a lot of current events or trends that maybe they don't necessarily hold up well in 2021 and beyond. You can talk about your American Pies, and maybe we'll be talking about that at some point in the future. But for this podcast episode, it is time to go back to 1997 and talk about Austin Powers, the International Man of Mystery, on another exciting edition of A Cast of the Past, with a brand new episode available each and every Sunday with yours truly, Juan Velas. I am from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Joining me from London, Ontario, Mr. Groovy Baby himself, Keith Hamilton. Keith.
Yeah, baby.
Did you watch Austin Powers in 97? Because, I mean, we were still growing up, and this is definitely a different type of comedy, right?
This series of movies is probably like a top 2 series for me. I've probably watched this movie 100 times. I love them so much. So yeah, I remember seeing it at the time. There are some embarrassing stories that I may or may not bring up later that involves little Keith watching this movie. But yeah, I love these movies. And before we get too deep into it, I want to go back to that American Pie thing you brought up and plead with you, Juan, and from Ryan from Boston, Massachusetts.
That's the other guy, yeah.
That you'll introduce in a second. Can we make a pact to never talk about American Pie on this?
No, we have to.
It's a good example.
Do we have to talk about it? Can't we just?
I mean, we don't have to do an episode on it, but
yeah,
I think it's a good thing to fall back to of something that doesn't age well. I'm just going to say, Keith,
let's let him keep his
not
dick in that pie and never, ever bring it up in a full episode.
Keith, by you telling us to not talk about American Pie, do you realize what we're doing right now? We're talking about American Pie.
But that means we never have to bring it up again, and that's my goal. Now back to a good movie.
But Mr. Ryan McNulty, the sexiest man in the history of A Cast of the Past from Boston, Mass. Did you watch Austin Powers growing up?
I did. I remember actually I saw all 3 movies in theaters, and I was probably too young to be going to the first one.
Yeah,
because I remember seeing it and then going into class and like asking my friends, "Hey, like, did you see this?" Like, nobody else in the class had seen this movie because they had responsible parents, but I did. It's not. There's way worse movies to see when you're a kid, but clearly it's a lot of jokes flew over my head that I hadn't seen this movie in so long that there was a lot of like, moments for me watching it.
Yeah, I think that when you watch it as an adult, it's so obviously sex driven. As a kid, I just thought it was a dude trying to act like a doofy. It's like, it takes a whole different.
This is a horny man here.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, I did get that part, but there's some other jokes that even you get the obvious stuff that he's, trying to get with everybody, but there's some more subtle jokes in there that as a kid I did not get at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to get to all that good stuff. And everybody watching and listening, if you're checking us out on YouTube, go down to the comment section. Let us know what you thought about this first Austin Power movie. Or everybody, hey, you can join the Discord over at acastofthepast.com/Discord and join that incredibly amazing family that is maybe not as groovy as Austin Powers, because I don't think anybody is. But for just a quick second here, let's go back to 1997 and check out some of the other films that came out. And man, talk about a contrast, because you have Titanic. That was a movie, right? Made a couple bucks.
Kind of took over the entire year.
Just a little bit. Like I remember when I watched Titanic, it was the first and only movie in history where our movie theaters overbooked. So I actually sat on the floor. It was hundreds of people in the movie theater.
That sounds awful.
Oh, it was horrible. I hated it.
Sitting on a floor for 3 hours sounds bad enough, but like a dirty, sticky movie theater floor, they charged you for that? Wow, good for them.
Hey, it happened, but there's probably not a lot of evidence. But we also got
there's
Jackie
a lot
Brown.
of evidence on that floor.
Wow. Yeah. As good as it gets. I love that movie. Good Will Hunting, Men in Black.
It's a good one.
Donnie Brasco. Let's see here. Oh, Face Off. Man, 1997 was...
Donnie Brasco? Is that like the prequel to Donnie Darko or something?
I guess. This
he got married, he changed his name.
Man, I could have sworn I saw this film, but then I'm looking at it now. Yeah, that came out in 1997. Hey, that's something I got to watch, even if it's not for the podcast. But when we go back to this movie, I would like to start this off with Mr. McNulty. Could you talk to us about who is this majestic man, this international man of mystery known as Austin Powers? Who is he?
Who is he?
Yeah.
You talking about the actor or the character?
The character. I'm not talking about that Mike Myers. Who the hell's Mike Myers, Ryan? Talking about Austin Powers, Danger Power.
That's true. Well, he's supposed to be this international spy, but I like how the beginning of the movie, like all these girls are chasing him. So it's like, how much of a spy are you if everyone knows who you are? But I think that's part of the joke. But, they don't really get too much into it. And I think that's to this movie's strength is they don't spend a lot of time on like details we don't care about. We just know, hey, Austin Powers, he is very much a product of the 60s, having an awesome time being a spy. And, obviously there's a lot of, this was built as like a parody of James Bond movies. And it really works to the strength of the movie.
And
it really
you're
does.
forgetting one important detail, Mr. McNulty, where much like yourself, Austin Powers is a man that women want to be with and men want to be.
Why is this a thing?
I mean, it's
Why
true.
is this a thing?
It's true. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, am I Ryan today? Nope. Well,
nope.
I'll try
I'm a
tomorrow.
lesser man for it, I guess.
Let me tell you, my experience is not at all what you think it is. It was a very, my college career, it was not a very fruitful time. Okay.
Would you call it groovy, baby?
Not really.
Okay.
No.
Can we how you have those title cards at the bottom of the episodes on the video version? Can you change Ryan's to shagadelic Ryan McNulty?
Oh, I would
Please,
love
no.
to. I would love to.
Thank God they're PNGs and he can't edit them on the fly.
This is one of the only episodes, Keith, by the way. So we got to make this count because it is not often that we could talk about penis pumps and they make absolute sense within the context of the episodes that we're covering.
It's a big day in your life, isn't it?
Exactly.
Don't
Maybe
bring me to your level
You
there.
can finally have that conversation, Juan. You've been.
But before we get to the general impressions, what I really appreciated about this film is, as insane as it is, I mean, the whole thing is that their quick justification to, well, how do we get this guy, that's like decades past, relevant in a modern time and have him be out of place? Well, you just freeze the damn guy because he wants to get the other bad guy who, I mean, Dr. Evil, much like Eddie Murphy with some of the movies, it's like Dr. Evil and Austin Powers are both played by Mike Myers. And I thought that's definitely a good dynamic. And that was also a 90s thing, right? I feel like we also got a couple of TV shows. We had
Nutty
the
Professor
Olsen twins.
is what you were thinking.
Yeah,
of
Nutty
for
Professor.
Eddie Murphy.
We had the Olsen twins sometimes where, they both play the same character, but even in movies, they would play that in.
The Parent Trap, where Lindsay Lohan was playing two different
That was the thing.
Tyler,
what was that movie?
Tyler Perry movie where he plays all the characters.
Yeah, that's still going.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, with Michael Keaton.
Yes, what was the name of that one?
Multiplicity, I believe.
There we go. That was just like a thing for whatever reason. But having said all of this, Keith, the floor is yours. What was your impression of this first Austin Powers movie, which you mentioned? I mean, you've watched this a ton.
Going back and watching it this time, I feel like I appreciate it on a whole new level. Because much like you guys said, when I was a kid, I didn't really get all the jokes, but now going back and being able to appreciate the writing of this movie, like, I think that, like, Mike Myers is just so on point with everything in this movie, as far as, like, how quick the characters are, and how, like, when he just throws in those subtle jokes, because I understand that humor is a subjective thing, but you really have something for everybody here as far as humor goes. Like, you have the low-hanging fruit jokes where he pisses for 3 minutes straight, but then if you want to, like, really go into, like, the deeper jokes and the stuff that's there, like, that's there too, and it's very quick to a point where you can miss it, or you could be too young to enjoy it. So in my opinion, that's what makes great comedy. It's the same reason why the Looney Tunes are so successful, and this is a very weird comparison, I understand that, but it's something really that the kids can enjoy and the parents can enjoy, and that's kind of the charm of the Austin Powers movies to me, where you can really get, there's different levels of getting stuff out of it, but you can get as much as you like, as much as you can comprehend, you can get out of it if this comedy is your style, which it is mine, and I love the movie for it.
And something that I wanted to say, much like you, I have watched the hell out of these movies. I own the VHS tapes, the DVDs, and the Blu-ray trilogy. And this is something that whenever I was cleaning my house, I would either have something like Beverly Hills Ninja with Chris Farley, Black Sheep, or one of these movies. And watching it now, now we have meme culture. And it's so weird how a lot of things, it's like The Office, right? When The Office came out, social media wasn't a thing. But I mean, you could tell somebody that The Office was a TV show that was released 2 years ago, and they would probably believe it just because it's so relevant. And as I was watching this film, yeah, it's a James Bond parody, but forget about that part. It's like this movie has so many other things that other films and people have copied that you kind of forget, like, yeah, this is kind of what popularized that. Like, all the way that the jokes are told. This is the most quotable movie I think I may have ever watched, because both of you know, like, my memory with films is awful. Like, I barely remember a single quote. And this is one of the only films that I'm like, oh, he's about to say that. He's about to say that. And it lets you know whether you like this style of comedy or not. Damn it, that's commendable, because writing that has got to be a pain in the ass, because you're treading that line. It's like, if you don't succeed at this type of comedy, I mean, this is just awful. And it's definitely a test of its time in 97. I don't think this film holds up nearly as well for maybe somebody watching it now. Like, I would love to see somebody that is 15 years old now watching this film and get their reaction. But in your case, Ryan, you're not 15, but you are a sex stallion. So being that, what's your impression about this film?
So much like you guys, I've seen this movie, hundreds of times, but it has been a long time since I've actually watched it all the way through, and quite a while since I've seen almost any of it. So again, that's why I bring up there was a lot of jokes that I just didn't get back when I watched it that I got now. So it did let me appreciate the writing a lot more. But yeah, definitely echoing Keith when it comes to there is something for everybody. Because as a kid, I love this movie. And there was a lot I didn't get, but there's enough of the lowbrow humor in there for a kid to enjoy, and then enough like subtle, smart writing for adults to enjoy. And I think the strength of this movie, I mean, it's the Mike Myers style written all over it, obviously, because he wrote the movie, because you can see very similar jokes to what you would see in the Wayne's World movies, and some of the stuff he worked on Saturday Night Live, like that style is all there, and it works so well. But I think the biggest strength of this movie is Austin Powers and Dr. Evil. There's so much focus on just them as characters, and they don't let the plot get in the way. The plot is just the most bare bones, simplest thing in the world, and all the time is dedicated to fleshing out who's Austin Powers and what he's all about, and who's Dr. Evil and what he's all about. And that's what makes the movie so fun, because it's all about just them being fun characters and not letting a James Bond plot get in the way of having a good time.
But it's almost like the other side of a coin to a James Bond movie, where if you look at the basics of just any James Bond movie, it's a character, it's a movie about James Bond versus villain character. They just took that and turned it into the humor aspect of it instead of like a serious plot of taking over the world. He just has a drill that penetrates it this time, but it's what makes this movie not just a good movie, but also a good parody movie. Like, I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of just how well they nail the fact that they are a James Bond parody in this first one. They kind of lose that in the second and third one as they become their own thing. But in this one, like, it is the perfect James Bond parody / British television parody. Like, it just oozes that, and it does such a good job with it.
No, and something that's so incredible about it is, yeah, you do have your two main characters in Austin Powers and Dr. Evil, but every other character, even Will Ferrell, who's in the film for like 3 minutes maybe.
I would like to point out that, like I said, I've seen this movie 100 times. I did not realize that Will Ferrell was in this movie until watching it last night. It blew my mind.
How blown away were you when you're like, I've seen this so many times and now I get it?
Me and my fiance were on the couch. We're like, what the hell is that, Will Ferrell? And then had to Google it, and sure enough.
He was still on Saturday Night Live at the time, so he wasn't like this big name yet. So I think a lot of people just kind of forget because it was before like his movie career really took off.
And I think that's another thing that's so special about a lot of these comedy films where you watch some actors that, you know, like I'm not the biggest Will Ferrell fan, but I love Anchorman. But even then, it's still Will Ferrell, and here he is playing a nobody, right? Like his character is basically a nobody.
You kind of appreciate it because he's finally not playing that Will Ferrell character that he always plays, you know?
So going back a little bit, because I feel like a lot of these films, you know, like I mentioned, you know, I love Chris Farley, even though I didn't really watch SNL. I didn't have a lot of access to that. So aside from the characters and the actors that I saw on the big screen, I really wasn't like too familiar with all of these guys. With Mike Myers, was it a case that you knew him before Austin Powers? I know we were a lot younger, right? So it's like it wasn't maybe as accessible, but did you know about him, or was it a result of, hey, here's Austin Powers. Oh, the actor's name is Mike Myers.
I had seen the Wayne's World movies as a kid as well, so I was aware of Mike Myers, and my dad showed me a lot of SNL stuff too, so I was pretty familiar with him. And I just kind of want to say, I was thinking about this after watching the movie of like, I feel like Mike Myers is kind of underrated because I know he had some real stinkers.
Yeah, I'm going to say that he is exactly where he needs to be in the grand scheme of things.
But
because
I just want to, like, if you think about it, right, he's played 3 iconic characters, right? You have Wayne in Wayne's World, you have voicing Shrek, and then you have Austin Powers. You would think he would be like a bigger star, you know what I mean? Just given that
and at a time
he's
he
part
was.
of like 3 really successful franchises.
Like at a time he was. Like I feel like you kind of have to talk about Mike Myers, and we'll probably get to this in that episode if we do it, but it's kind of post Gold member Mike Myers and pre-Gold member Mike Myers, where everything kind of just jumped, like cliff dove after that movie, because that's when you started to get The Love Guru and
that's
trash like
the
that.
Infamous movie.
And like that's why I say that I think he's exactly where he needs to be, because before all of that happened, like absolutely I would put him in the late 90s, early 2000s as the top TV and movie comedians of all time from his SNL career and these great movies that you mentioned. But it just something happened and lost a lot of points between now and then.
Actually, I'm going to say something a little bit different where, sometimes I bring up the whole wrestling analogy because we are wrestling fans, where sometimes you'll watch an older show, you're like, oh man, this guy was not popular then, but he will be huge now. I feel like in the social media, YouTube era, if all of this came out now, first of all, it would not be the way this film was. But Mike Myers and his style of comedy, it's like Jeff Dunham, but good, and like Dane Cook, but good. Right?
Yeah.
Because I do put him in a similar category, but think about how far ahead of time Mike Myers was. Like, I mean, I'm pushing like a decade afterwards with some of these guys. And I think that it was just a testament of you saw these films. And I think what Keith, brought up a good point. And for context, we will be reviewing all 3 Austin Powers films throughout the year, not necessarily back to back in terms of podcast episodes, but it is an interesting topic where a Goldmember, even though I don't think it was a bad movie, I mean, I haven't watched it in a long time. Even when it came out, I'm like, I don't feel this was all that necessary. Now, going back to this movie as a whole, I mean, even just scrolling down the cast, you have Elizabeth Hurley playing Vanessa Kensington. And I mean, when you think a lot about like these popular female protagonists in films, like Elizabeth Hurley was in a whole lot of stuff that I remember watching growing up. What did you think about her dynamic which was weird because she plays the daughter of the original crush that Austin Powers had on, but then he wants to shag her, but then he also wanted to shag her mom, and that was a little weird for me, even now. But
time travel.
What do you think about this, Ryan? You got to know about this stuff.
Yeah, I guess there's some sort of justification with time travel because technically Austin Powers has an age. They don't really get into it, and I think that's probably for the best.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep, that's it. That's all I got.
I was expecting a little more. Work with me here, Ryan.
Nope.
No, but yeah, it's true though. But then another person that is just so interesting knowing who he became is Seth Green, who looks like he's 10 years old in this film, playing Scott Evil. And his character, even though he is he's not in the film for a long time, I do think he's the best character or the best arc in this film because it's, as you mentioned, Ryan, the film doesn't give a damn about its plot. It gives a damn about the characters. But then in a thing that nobody needs, hey, guess what, Dr. Evil, you have a son. And then how does this guy with like no social skills, he tries to develop the relationship. They go to family therapy, which I freaking love that scene so much. Like, I can't just pick one favorite scene between Scott and Dr. Evil.
Isn't it?
It is. What?
It's Carrie Fisher who's playing the therapist. Yeah.
Which is amazing. I mean, it's like freaking Carrie Fisher in this. What? Just unbelievable. And every scene, even when they're trying to like hug and Dr. Evil's like, come on. And he's like, cool, I'm like, oh man, this is so cringy, but it's the good cringe, right? I think it is. Dr. Evil is the definition of good cringe for me. What about you guys and your take on Dr. Evil?
To stick with Scott for a second there, because it kind of goes into my Dr. Evil thoughts, is I love Scott is a character that this movie needed, because a lot of times in these parody movies, it's kind of like everybody's in on the joke and everybody's working towards just making it the most ridiculous thing possible. I love how Scott was pretty much the exact opposite of all that, where he was like the grounded character in these movies, where he's a crappy teenager who happens to have a weird psychopathic father. And the scene that really really fulfills that for me is when Austin and Vanessa, thank you, were in that like shark cage, the shark ring, and Dr. Evil's like, I'm going to kill you with my overly elaborate shark tank with laser beams, and Scott's just like, well, let me just get my gun. Like, because that's what should happen in that. You should shoot your arch nemesis, but no, you need the sharks with freaking laser beams attached to their heads.
And they actually top it off because they could have left it there, but then the doors are closing and Scott is about to freaking lose it. Just like, You don't even want to watch him? It's like, no.
No, I'm sure it'll go good. I'm
he's
sure
like,
it'll
we're just
go
gonna
good.
close the door and assume everything went according to plan, you know.
And he was the perfect, much like their relationship that they establish in the movie, like he's the perfect anti-Dr. Evil, where everything that's so over the top about Dr. Evil is just the total opposite with Scott. And I think that's why it just works so well together, because the movie needed both, just because everything was just so like high up there with insanity with the rest of the movie, and then you just have Scott way down there.
Yeah, no, it's a good dynamic because, you know, Austin Powers and Dr. Evil are not, they're basically separate through most of the movie. So Scott's kind of like that good foil to also just point out the absurdities of like typical movie villains and the stupid decisions that they do. So just having someone there that's pointing it out and kind of having that perspective of like what the audience would be thinking, it just definitely adds a lot.
It really does. And so many other things about this movie are just dumb fun. I think if there's another way to just describe this movie as dumb fun, because when you guys talked about the fact that there's some jokes that are definitely for adults, but then there's other jokes and characters that were made for kids. I mean, number 2. Freaking number 2. And I remember as a kid, I would cry in that bathroom scene because it is so outrageous. You have Tom freaking Arnold showing up.
Even as a
Tom
30-year-old
Arnold.
man, that bathroom scene is my favorite part of that movie.
Okay, so
good.
many things about that is quotable, or like there's layers upon layers in that scene. What stuck out to you guys in that whole process between Mr. Charms, the Tom Arnold, like the whole process?
It's because that is something that would happen in a James Bond movie where somebody is trying to get him in a bathroom. I'm pretty sure that is something that has actually happened in a spy movie or James Bond movie, but just being able to look at the ridiculousness of it from everyone around it, like the whole trying to kill someone and them grunting, and it sounds like they're trying to take a dump, and you have
How
the
about
other
a courtesy flush, Keith? How about a courtesy flush?
Exactly. Like, and then when he's yelling, "Who does number 2 work for?"
Yeah.
And Tom Arnold's just like, "Yeah, you,
like,
you
"Show him."
tell him, buddy. You show him who's boss." It's just so good.
I for some reason I never forget the line where Tom Arnold's like, he's like, grab a hold of something, bite your lip, and give it hell. Like,
Oh,
No, they
it's
just
so
like at
good.
the end. Like, Jesus, man, what did you eat? It's like,
Yeah.
that doesn't. How?
Doesn't make sense.
How? You don't just shit a person, man, that I know of.
Yeah.
I mean, that I know of. That could be a thing.
Poop jokes are funny to us, you know.
It is.
They
It
are.
doesn't
They
get
are.
much better.
Now, number 2 did have a colleague, a comrade that throughout the film, she gets involved in persuasive ways. And I forget her name. What's her
Frau
name, Ryan?
for Bizna or whatever, right?
No, you're
Is it?
talking about Halata Vagina.
Ah,
Exactly.
that one.
It's like,
You have to
Ryan,
be
how
really
could you
careful
forget about
how
that
you
name?
say that.
Of all
Halata
people, you should know.
Vagina.
Exactly. I'm sorry. Okay. So with that, like, what did you guys think about the whole dynamic of them incorporating more characters and just more characters? And then as the film progresses, something that I love is that it does get surprisingly serious, because with all these characters that they insert, you can tell that Austin Powers is aware that, wow, I am horrifically out of place, right? From the teeth and the fact that Vanessa keeps calling him out on it, to the clothes. You know, he says like, "Oh, I'm English," but then everybody's pretending like it almost like he's a clown, right? He's like a parody of an English person. What did you think of that evolution as they introduce more characters into the film?
I mean, that's kind of what separates. Yeah. We're going from the poop jokes to a serious conversation. I kind of need to get my bearings here for a second, but that to me is what separates a good movie from a great movie. The fact that you have all of these jokes and we just sat here laughing about one scene for the last 5 minutes, but all of that stuff is happening around it. There's like real character development and serious moments that happen throughout the movie to make those characters progress. Like that's what separates something like an Austin Powers from one of those dumpster movies, like a Scary Movie or an American Pie as an example, where you have this character development, and not all of it is for the sake of making a joke or getting to the next joke. Like it almost works against that as you progress in the movie, because that was my biggest takeaway from it. Like this movie really front loads its humor, and there's kind of like a halfway point pretty much when they get to the secret underground base, that it becomes a movie at that point, where it's not just the joke factory anymore, and we're kind of developing the plot more.
We do have Dr. Evil in his like plastic suit falling everywhere.
Off his chair. That's true. Like the humor is still there, don't get me wrong, but it takes a back seat at that point in the movie, and I think that's cool, because I think if it would have just kept going at the pace it was going at the beginning of the movie humor wise, it probably would have burned out, because this is a really quick movie where the stuff happens very, very fast in it. So I feel like a lot of that would have been lost, especially humor wise, and I think it was a really smart choice that they did that.
And I think, obviously I didn't watch a lot of SNL as a kid, but I think one of Mike Myers' benefits with SNL is that I love a lot of improv, and I've seen like live improv, where they're changing the scenery and all that. And this kind of feels like that, because notice that this movie has a lot of specific places, even the bathroom scene, right? It's like the bathroom scene has a purpose, but then there's the scene with the female robots, but it's got like a bed in the background. It's a very visual thing. Even the shark tank, which aren't even like sharks, right? It's like everything has a set piece. And I think it becomes as a result of that, experience with like improv and all that stuff. And it makes it a memorable film. And it's like easily digestible, because as you mentioned, it never stops. But it's like in a really good
pace
way.
And a good balance of it has a good balance of there's not really like action, but it's like the minor action that it needs. It doesn't go over the top. It doesn't try to make Austin Powers, if Austin Powers came out today, he'd be doing like crazy, like slow motion driving through a building to another building, and all this over that. Like they don't go crazy with the action. The biggest thing he does is do that flip into his car, and he hits his nuts.
Judo flip.
Like, so, they put just the bare minimum of action needed to have it be like a James Bond movie, and spent the rest on just making it fun. And I think like the whole fun kind of first mentality is why it's successful.
I agree. So we've talked about a lot of different scenes in the film, and like it's such a funny and positive film as far as you just have like a good time. What are other scenes that we haven't brought up that you're just like, man, I love going back and remembering and reliving this scene? Because I can think of two. I'll start with this. It happens twice. It's first they're at that party at the beginning where he punches a woman, and then that's not a woman, that's a man, baby. But then they're in the freaking spy room, and then he punches the man's mom. He's like, that's a man. Well, it's pretty masculine. It's like you just punch somebody's mother, and then you're just like double dipping on that, and it's just incredible.
But again, that's something that they use, that's a funny moment that they use for like a serious plot line, because it's something that like in the 60s or in the 70s, Austin Powers is like, boom, I get it. Yeah, that is an undercover agent. But him being out of place now in 1997, that's when he punches Basil Exposition's mom right in the face.
Yeah.
So it was like
subtle
storytelling.
Everything that worked for him in the 60s when he was in his prime and he was the coolest thing, all of a sudden it's going wrong in the 90s because he's out of place. So it was a good way of having humor, but also telling that to the audience that, he still hasn't adjusted to the current day.
Another scene that I can't remember if Austin Powers made this a thing, and maybe you guys can fill this in, or anybody watching or listening, that penis pump scene, and more than just like the penis pump, I'm just like trying to get that out there, right? But it's one of those scenes where the actor denies, right? That the actor denies that it is his, but it's like, oh, the penis pump, but then you have the certificate. Oh, then you wrote a book specifically pointing out that is your thing. And I was laughing, but at the same time, I kept thinking to myself, like, was Austin Powers the film that either made that a thing, popularized it, where the character, like, the more that they are in denial, there's just like a lot more evidence?
I mean, I think that's just like a classic kind of comedy thing that I'm sure there's been a million different sketches, but I think it's just kind of, you know, how you use that and how you make it your own, because I think there's plenty of like these comedy scenarios that people have put together, but it's how, you know, it's the Mike Myers style that makes it what it is. Some of the things about the movie, though, that were kind of weird for me was just because like all the Austin Powers quotes were just like beaten to death over, like, just people would use them for soundboards on like radio stations, and like, you know, it took over pop culture for so long that it was almost weird to hear it again. Because you've heard it in so many other places so many times that it's like it feels a little dated, even though it's like no fault of the movie. It's really just because it took over for so long that it feels that way.
Yeah, I ran into a similar issue watching it as I did when I watched Empire Strikes Back on the show last year, where I knew the line was about to happen before they actually said it, just because pop culture had beaten it to death at that point, especially and especially in this internet age where you have the things like shagadelic, like soundboards where you have the "do I make you horny, baby" constantly out there. And yeah, a lot of the time the quote, and that kind of falls in like the lowbrow humor part of this movie, was just like pop cultured to death, for lack of a better term. But it was nice because that gave me more appreciation for the highbrow humor of the movie.
And I think that's also a problem maybe leading to Goldmember, because
it gets way worse from here.
No, and I think that's the challenge. And, you know, I'll forever keep bringing up Terminator as the example, because once again, like, we watched all of them where once you did it, and you did it maybe to the best that you can possibly do it, any other time that you try and do it, it just falls short. And there's a good reason that this movie is quotable. And I forget which other film we did review in the podcast where we said a similar thing. This is so quotable that we almost see that as a negative part of the film, but that's no fault of the film. It's just a result of, hey, it was a damn good film, highly quotable. That's the whole process, right? And not to mention, this film is just so visually stunning to look at. I mean, every single character has a definitive costume, right? You know, even when they get kidnapped, the fact that Dr. Evil's like, you know, do you like your futuristic paper bag type, you know, silver outfits? But it's all the little details. They could have just done really good characters, and I don't think that would have been enough. It's the fact that visually, they really took that to the next level in almost every scene, whether it be, you know, even when you have the robots with like the nipples that kill people, like you have
the fembots,
right?
Get it right.
Exactly, the fembots. But you create such a great ambience, and it's the fact that he's got, you know, that super thick, extra thick front hair, right? Like chest hair.
Yeah.
That really sells the whole purpose of the movie for me. It is all about the chest hair.
It all comes back to the chest hair.
The secret lies in the chest
really
hair. And that's where
and there you go.
The secret. That's. Hey, I was actually going to ask you, Ryan. So you mentioned that this movie does have a couple of jokes that maybe a kid wouldn't get, and you got more as an adult. Could you provide an example there?
Really?
Yeah, of course. Really put him on the spot there. Good Lord.
Okay, so
I'll give you one. Or do you have one? Because I can stall for you if you need to. Okay.
So the one that I definitely didn't get was when a lot of vaginas said, "Oh, like in in Japanese culture, like the man comes first and then the woman," and then Mike Myers said, "Or sometimes not at all." And like as a kid, I did like that just went right over my head,
And probably rightfully so.
yeah.
Yeah, one that really stuck out to me was, and it was more of like a "Eey" moment, was the whole when Dr. Evil gets or when he's unfrozen and he's going through his plans and he's like, yeah, we'll make a scandal and Prince Charles needs to get divorced. I'm like, oh, this is 1997. That's the same year Diana died. That's a rough choice.
Oh, yeah.
So that one really stuck out to me this time.
Are there any other things about the movie? We focus mostly on the positives, but every film, no, doesn't matter how good it is, always has this one part that's just like, that doesn't hold up. And that, you made a good case right now with what you just brought up. But in addition to that, is there something else that you're just thinking to yourself, maybe that was great for 97, for now, it just doesn't hold up all that well?
And now we get to the embarrassing story that I teased earlier.
Ooh.
Where...
Oh, yeah. Ryan, get the loop.
What? Sorry, what?
What?
We're kicking you off this podcast after this.
I felt happy.
This is 100% a me thing, but it's really, really hard for me to go back and watch that hot tub scene because from what I can remember, I'm pretty sure a lot of vaginas was little Mr. Hamilton's first, doing. So it's weird. It's really weird to think about that.
You'll never forget those floaty boobs.
No, I'll never forget that lot of vagina.
That's actually another interesting element. That's not a specific movie.
Where are you going with this?
Hey, I'm gonna go somewhere with that.
Are you gonna share your firsts as well?
Honestly, I don't remember. I really don't.
I wouldn't be able to tell you.
But it is interesting that there's all these films. It's like, we brought up Titanic, right? In 97. I remember as a kid, that was my first time in the movie theater seeing a specific part of the female body that I was not used to seeing on a big screen, especially with my family sitting on the floor. Not the best, right? But then there's always these different scenes in films that you're not expecting to see. Some of these parts, and maybe little old Keith, he went ham.
Yeah. Well, a part of me went ham. Didn't know what to do with it yet, but...
Okay, so I thought I'd bring up an interesting fact. Somehow I'm transitioning this.
Yeah. Do you want to know what the legacy of this movie is? Well, I just told you.
Oh, yeah. That's quite the legacy, man. That's quite the legacy. More power to you, Keith. Originally, Dr. Evil was not going to be played by Mike Myers. Who do you think Mike Myers wanted to play the role of Dr. Evil?
I have no idea, but I'm going to guess somebody from SNL. A big SNL name.
What about you, Ryan?
I feel like I might have accidentally read this, but I totally forget who it was, so go ahead.
Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey
right. I did see that.
Okay.
Was the person, but he was working on the film Liar Liar, which also came out in 97. I love that film. See, that's another one. We should review Liar Liar and then Yes Man back to back. I feel like there's something there. There's something there that could be done. What do you think? I mean, we've seen Jim Carrey play the role of Dr. Eggman now, right? So he didn't do one doctor, but he did become another one. What did you think about it? Hypothetically, if he were to play Dr. Evil, knowing who Jim Carrey is, what he brings to the table, do you think it would have been as memorable?
I'm sure he would have done a great job because he's a great actor, but it's really hard for me to wrap my head around Mike Myers not playing both those characters, because to me, that's such a pivotal part of the series.
Yeah, I think Mike Myers' style of humor in the way like Dr. Evil was written I don't think Jim Carrey would have been as good. I'm sure I think he just would have been very different.
Yeah, like,
because
think
Jim
about
Carrey's
that.
style is so different.
Think about that monologue in the therapy session where he's talking about the hills of Belgium and his childhood, like trying
The
to picture
meat helmets.
Jim exactly in meat helmets and shaving his testicles. Like thinking about Jim Carrey delivering that, it just seems off and wrong.
I think it would
to
have been
me.
totally written completely different if it
Yeah,
was Jim
100%.
Carrey. And I think Jim Carrey, I mean, we saw him as the Riddler, right? And oof. So I just
That's a
don't
good point.
think him as a villain, like an over the top villain, and this would be for a comedy movie. I just don't think it would have been too over the top. And Dr. Evil, as we'll see when we cover the other movies, he gets more and more absurd.
Oh, yeah.
But I think Dr. Evil in this movie was like the perfect level of parody parody Bond villain, but not like way over the top.
Agreed.
So I actually have some follow-up to the comments that Keith made about the family, the prince. So here, when Dr. Evil suggests blackmailing the royal family about the Prince of Wales, in reality, she had been killed in Paris at the time of the film's release in the United Kingdom. The UK's release of this movie removed the reference to Prince Charles since Diana had recently died. However, when the TV channel Sony Pictures Classics ran this film in 2020 in the UK, the dialogue was intact. In 2020, so last year. So, like, holy crap, I'm reading this live now. I thought I was going to read, like, 2010 or something.
I mean,
that's kind of incredible.
One of the most
so they
touchy
just now put it in.
subjects.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
totally understandable.
Yeah, and then there was another one here that I wanted to read, which was the scene where they talk about the Lucky Charms. I forget her character name.
Frau.
Mindy Sterling is the actress.
Frau,
We had that whole
Frau,
something like that. The whole line about like they're always after her Lucky Charms, and she's talking about the cereal. That was completely improvised, which actually makes a lot of sense because the pacing in that scene was a little bit different. Everybody was a lot more quick driven. If you notice there, it's like there were more pauses, and you could tell that the actors they didn't necessarily know what to react to. But I like that because a lot of comedy films, their best stuff is sometimes improvised.
Agreed.
And the way she describes the commercial and how like it's not really how you would describe a Lucky Charm, like it's like a really
felt
weird.
real. It felt real in a way that a movie script usually doesn't, and that makes total sense.
Yeah. So
also, I never got before when Dr. Evil described Frau as from the militant wing of the Salvation Army, which like I never like actually understood that before, but like
that's funny.
Like I don't know if you have that here, Juan. Do you have Salvation Army near?
Yeah.
Do you know
we do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you know it's like a charity.
Yeah. It's like a thrift.
Okay.
Yeah, the charity stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's another one that I didn't get until last night watching it, and God, it was so funny.
Yeah.
Now I'm reading something
one of my
here
other favorite, just like subtle jokes, is when number two's going over the like, oh, we have like shipping in Texas, and you know this happening in California, and then we have in Chicago like a factory which makes miniature models of other factories. Yeah.
I mean, of course.
Yeah.
Man, this is an interesting topic to close on. Daniel Craig, the sixth actor to play James Bond, went onto record to say Austin Powers messed up the James Bond film franchise. The producers feared people would not be able to take James Bond seriously after Austin Powers mocked the campy nature of the series. This led to the darker and grittier Casino Royale reboot. What's like your general reaction? Though, agree or disagree? It is true in many ways. Because I did not take James Bond seriously after watching Austin Powers, so he's not wrong.
He's not wrong, and I think that if they looked at Austin Powers and that was their impression, I think they were maybe up their own ass a little too much. But hey, I love Casino Royale, so I guess it kind of worked out for
Thank Mike
them.
Myers.
What
about you, Ryan?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say is like like that trilogy, the Austin Powers trilogy, took over pop culture during that time. And it was just so like ingrained in the minds of everyone that if they did try to do the campy James Bond style, people would have just laughed it off. And I think in a way it helped reinvent the James Bond series.
Because Bond
and
movies came out during
It's probably
that
better
time.
off for it, because that style of action movie, I don't think that would really survive today anyway. So it's for the better, really.
Because I'm trying to think, between those three movies, like, there were Bond movies. Because, yeah.
Oh, here we go.
I think there was some Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah,
Yeah, there was two.
Yeah, released 7 months before the James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies. Man. Okay, I can totally see why that would be a problem for James Bond films, because then this comes out, James Bond comes out after, and you kind of just like mocked that, and it became a hit. So I can see why that would happen. And I guess like to get your closing thoughts about this here is that even though it is a comedy film and James Bond is very different in terms of tone, you get a lot of the same stuff, because you get gadgets, you get the girl, you get the plot. Even though it's delivered differently, both films in a weird way can satisfy the need of, I want an espionage or international spy movie. The pacing is worse and all that, but the pieces that are still there. Like, do you guys sort of get what I mean? Because that's how I feel. Because if you were to ask me right now, if I were to watch GoldenEye or I were to watch Austin Powers and I just want to have a good time, both give me a witty, investigative person that's going to get out of different scenarios. He's going to get the girl. He's going to try to get the bad guy. I'm going to go with the one that makes me laugh more. That's my example. But what did you guys think about that possible interlaced process between both?
I mean, I think Austin Powers, it's like first and foremost a comedy, but I mean, I agree with you. I would probably rather watch Austin Powers than any James Bond movie, to be completely honest. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of the Daniel Craig ones, to be fair. But as far as, like GoldenEye is a decent movie, but I don't like, I don't. It's just okay to me. Like I liked it a lot more back in the day because of the Nintendo 64 game. But really, most of the time, I don't really find James Bond movies that interesting to watch. So I would just rather I would get enough from Austin Powers and not need to really dive too far into James Bond. That's just my opinion, though, because I've just never been huge on the series.
And to me, that just speaks to how good of a James Bond parody this movie is. The fact that it took its source material and made a arguably better version of it. Like, that's the biggest praise you could give a movie like this, as far as I'm concerned.
So to summarize, Austin Powers is the Oreo of the film series, because for those who don't know, and actually know this without looking it up because I love me some food, Oreos, those cookies that we all love, they were not the original cookie. They were actually the ripoff of another cookie, which that name I forgot, but it became so popular that it made the original cookie look sort of dull.
Man,
in
talk
comparison.
about getting the short end of the stick there. My God.
Yeah, I had a really terrible name. Let me see. I want to look that up now.
Yeah, right. It's like, we can't leave people hanging with that information, man. The original Oreo cookie. You can look that up.
Hydrox? Was that it?
And that is why Oreos won.
Yeah. Okay.
It sounds like a cleaning solution, not a cookie. So.
It sounds like if I want to lose weight, I would take 3 Hydrox in the morning and then go work out.
Pretty much. But everybody, as we mentioned, we will be covering the other Austin Power films throughout the year, because last year we covered a large variety of films in terms of sequels. We talked about Home Alone 3, that's available in the archives, talked about all of the Terminator films. But this is going to be different, because with comedy, it's like, if it doesn't make you laugh as much as the first, I think it's a lot more noticeable when it is an inferior film. And we know for a fact critically that was definitely the case. But let us know what you thought about Austin Powers 1 by dropping a comment and subscribing on YouTube. If you like what we do, the best way to support us is by leaving that 5-star review on Stitcher, Apple Podcast. You can share clips that we post on Twitter, A Cast of the Past, and once again, join the Discord at acastofthepast.com/ Discord. So that's going to be doing it for another exciting episode of A Cast
To the
Past, baby. Yeah.
Yeah, baby.